Are you looking for new and interesting ways to lay out your quilt? Well, join me today. I've got some really good ideas for you to discover new ways to lay your quilts out. Hi, I'm Roberta from Quilt Crafters Corner, and today I want to talk about quilt layout. There are many ways to lay your blocks out. The good old fashioned traditional way is right next to each other. Then there's also sashing and cornerstones to add to your blocks to give them that little bit of flavor. I want to talk a little bit about a more non traditional way on how to lay out your blocks. So, it just occurred to me that everybody gets into the habit, routine, whatever you want to call it, into laying those blocks right next to each other or putting sashing between them. Or if you put them on point, you're still putting them in rows and columns. I want to talk a little bit today about a different look and a different flavor to the types of quilts that you can do, even with traditional blocks. So let's kind of dive into this. The first thing that I normally do is I start with graph paper. Now, I started with graph paper originally when I started doing t-shirt quilts. People would bring me t-shirts and I would do t-shirt quilts. And you really need the graph paper to lay it out because you got to figure out how big that t-shirt is and that block is and what's going to go where and lay it out. And in order to get the math right, graph paper was the best thing. Now there's many options for graph paper. You can buy them in pads. You can even get them as big as 12 by 12 at some quilt stores. Or you can just go online and print some free paper that's graph paper. I normally use 1/4 inch squares. So 4 squares is 1 inch. And then that way it kind of makes the math easier. So let's break the math down a little bit for you to understand. So when I have traditional 12.5 inch unfinished blocks, I know they're finished at 12 inches. Some of them have three rows and 3 columns. And those are normally the 4.5 inch squares that'll finish at 4 inside the block. So it's a 3 by 3 pattern. Whereas if you have the 3.5 inch squares, that's a 4 by 4 pattern. So there's two ways to look at that. Let me show you a couple of examples. The first example I have for you is called the Star Flower. Now this was a block that I did last year. There's a video up on it. So if you want to go look at that, that's available for you to go see. Now the Star Flower is a 3.5 inch block and it is 4 by 4. And if you look at this very closely, you can see that the blocks are, it's 4 across and 4 down. So this is a real easy way, especially on the graph paper, to draw this block out. Now if you look at Jacob's Ladder is a little bit different because it's got 3 columns by 3 columns and 3 rows. And so, even though you have 4 patches and a half square triangle that create that row or column, that's a bigger block. It's a 4.5 inch square. So what this is a little harder to do on the 1/4 inch square graph paper, but it can be done. If you look at it closely, you can fit this into the 1/4 inch paper. Now the last example I have for you is a 6.5 inch square that makes a 12.5 inch block. So let's take a look at spinning. It was also a block video that I did for you last year. Now if you look at this very carefully, you have 4 blocks that are 6.5 inches, and this is really easy to do on the graph paper, and it makes for a bigger square. So it's easier to color in. So now, once you have your pattern drawn on your graph paper and you've got it all figured out the way you want it, then you need to color it in. Now, I just use marking pencils, colored pencils, crayons will work, whatever you have. Don't go out to any expense, but just whatever you have. Marking pens work just as well as crayons or colored pencils. And I think I have all of them. So once you get your pattern drawn onto your graph paper and you color it in, you now have something to work with. And these, I get an idea of what blocks I'm going to do and where I'm going to put them. So now let's take a look at something that's a little bit more non-traditional. This is more a non-traditional type of quilt layout, and this is really what I want to talk about today. And in using your graph paper, this is a real simple way to lay out a quilt, to leave some open space, some negative, what we call negative space, or you could put some low volume material fabric in so that the blocks look like they're almost floating. It gives an element of design in it. So let's take a look at this. This is just something that I've worked up, and I want to show you how I did this. So I started with a 32 by 32 square just to get an idea. And I just took some very traditional blocks and set them in here, just so that you can get an idea of how to get some symmetry, but yet get some open space in there. Now, when I placed my two larger blocks in the corners, just to give them some balance, and so I knew I had to balance it the other way. So I have my two smaller blocks in the center, and then I have flying geese units on the top, on the outside corners. This gives it the look that there's more open space and that the blocks aren't right next to each other, and it gives it a little bit more character, distinction, whatever you want to call it. So this is a really good way for you to make those traditional blocks, but set them in a different type of setting so that they look different. They give you a more modern effect or contemporary look. So if you notice, I broke this into 4 quadrants. I've got the 2 quadrants for the bigger squares, the 12-inch squares, and then I've got 2 quadrants for the lower or the smaller squares. And this is, you don't have to break it into 4. I could have easily broken this into just 2 quadrants, either top and bottom or left to right. I could have done it that way too. So you kind of need to decide where you're going with this, where you want to go with this layout. So whether it's 4 quadrants or 2, just pick one and start to play with your design then. So what I did next is I took my blocks that I had done on my graph paper and I put them in there in order to figure out which was going to look best where. So I started to just play with this. This is just a random idea that I had in order to give my blocks a little bit more space and distance between each other. This is an easy way to make your quilts a little bit more unusual and unique. And that's what I really like about some of these ideas, is just making your quilts a little bit more unusual and unique. Now with this particular layout that I've done, I'm thinking that my quilting is going to also be different. I could do a number of different things with the quilting on this to make this look rather spectacular. There's straight line quilting. Just straight lines across the whole entire quilt will give it an interesting and unique look. The other thing that I thought about is cross, diagonal quilting lines, and then that gives it also another interesting, unique look. I can also just stitch in the ditch in all of my blocks. I could do either a vertical or horizontal straight line stitch through those negative areas or the low volume areas in order to give the quilt a different texture and look. There's many things that you can do in regards to the quilting of a quilt like this. It's very, very interesting. It could be very unique and different from anything that you have done before. Now, as far as the flying geese in the two corners, these can also be quilted in a very interesting way. Each of the geese themselves could be quilted and left the negative space blank. It really depends on what you want to do, but this could be an interesting way to make your quilts a little bit different and a little bit more unique. I want to thank you for joining me today, and I'm really looking forward to building a place of a community of quilters for us to come together and share ideas and learn new things. So be looking for that. Within the next week or so, I'm going to have something for you to come look at, and I'm hoping you're as excited about it as I am, because it gives you a place to come and share ideas, learn some new ideas, and just enjoy other quilters, have conversations with other quilters so that we can all learn from each other. I want to thank you for joining me today, and if you haven't subscribed, please subscribe to the channel. Leave me a comment. I'd really like to know what you think about a different setting for your quilts. Also, if you like this video, please give it a like. That way it goes out to more people. Until next time, happy quilting.